Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Congregation Shamalot's Influencers and Inspirers. We are so glad to have you with us as we learn from the leaders in our religious movement, in our county, and in our country. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Joshua Holo, Dean of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, Los Angeles campus. Welcome, Dean. We're so glad that you're here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Rabbi Steinberg.
My
Rick, my
pleasure.
friend.
Absolutely. We'll get into that in a moment. I got to do the official introduction. And then what we'll do today is explore rabbinical school and how it kind of works and what it's about. And then some larger vision issues for the Reform movement in the place of liberal Judaism in America and in the world. So Dr. Holo is the dean, as I said, of the Skirball campus in Los Angeles of HUC, and is also the associate professor of Jewish history. He co-founded HUC's digital learning platform called the College Commons, which is very similar to this, kind of in a different tact, but really exposing our communities to people that you might not otherwise be exposed to. Together with religious leaders in Los Angeles, of the neighborhood of Los Angeles, where HUC is located, he co-founded the Neighborhood Religious Leadership Coalition. He's the author for the Brill series on Jewish studies, was a regular contributor of Torah commentary to the Jewish Journal of Greater Los Angeles, and penned an article on liberal Zionism titled Peering into the Nationalistic Mirror in the Fragile Dialogue. That's in 2017. He has a PhD, if I'm not mistaken, from the University of Chicago. Is that correct?
Correct.
Tell us your area of study.
My area of study was designed for people who had sleeping problems and couldn't figure out how to get to sleep at night. My area of study is Byzantine Jewish history. For those of you who don't remember 10th grade history, the Byzantine Empire was the Eastern Roman Empire, which after the Roman Empire began to shift in the Mediterranean, when it became Christian as opposed to pagan after Constantine the Great, we call it the Byzantine Empire. And in that population, as throughout the Mediterranean, there was an important Jewish community, a Jewish population really, and I study that world, as well as the world of the Northern Mediterranean in general, the Christian realm and the Jews who lived in there during the Middle Ages.
I am not asleep. In fact, I'm interested. We're going to have you back as a scholar one day because this is really rich stuff. But I asked you that question for a deliberate reason, Josh. How do you go from, the depths of scholarship to being the dean of a rabbinical school? And there's certainly a ton of scholarship at rabbinical school, but it's a different kind of job. What made you want to come to this work?
There's a number of things going on. Most importantly is that the campus, the Skirball campus in Los Angeles, which I say to your listeners and viewers is your campus, our campus, is in fact composed of a rabbinical school, a school of education, a school of nonprofit management, Jewish nonprofit management, and we serve as USC's academic undergraduate Jewish studies program. So in this constellation of programs, some of them were more of a natural fit for my academic profile, such as USC undergraduate studies, which is very secular academic. But the rabbinical school in many ways fits too, because my field of study is, of course, Jewish history, which is relevant for rabbinical studies. But I had a lot to learn when it comes to education and nonprofit management. So it was a growth edge for me. But at the end of the day, I came to this because enough people agreed with me that I was able to do it and that I wanted to be in the conversation, not just in the classroom, but also in the community, shaping the Jewish conversation about our future together and all the exciting ways, not just intellectually, but also communally and religiously, that we can flourish in the 21st century.
And how long have you been the dean?
This is my 11th year.
I thought so. Well, I can tell you as a colleague and really a student that Dr. Holo's influence is in 11 years been a generation. And so thank you for your leadership and really guiding, I think, our movement into kind of the next phase of Jewish life. And this year in particular, I would imagine for all of us. Let's talk about HUC a little bit. I'll just do 2 minutes here of Reform history. 1873, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations was founded to fund a rabbinical college called Hebrew Union College, so we could have American-born rabbis serving Americans in this land. And it's a wild success. I mean, HUC is a wild success. If I'm not mistaken, we're the oldest seminary in the world because, of course, the Holocaust did away with all of the other seminaries and yeshivas that existed prior to HUC. And so just in general, talk to me about HUC-JIR. Jewish Institute of Religion came in the late 1940s when HUC merged with the liberal school of Stephen S. Wise out of New York City's Free Synagogue. But as you come to it, what do you think HUC's mission is?
HUC's mission is to train and educate Judaism's leaders. In the Reform camp, that's for our rabbis, but in the education and non-Jewish nonprofit, I was about to say non-Jewish profit, but I meant Jewish nonprofit camp. In that camp, it could be beyond the Reform movement. We also train scholars for the academy, which is also not necessarily for Jewish academy. It could be for other colleges and universities. So we have a broad gamut of types of leaders for Judaism that we train over the span of our 145-year history and over 4 campuses: Jerusalem, New York, Cincinnati, and Los Angeles. So that's the mission. But we also have a mission to be the leaders of the thought, the thought behind Judaism. We need to understand, how is it that women are rabbis? Well, women are rabbis because the Reform movement, and specifically the Hebrew Union College, invested its intellectual capital in the pursuit of understanding a lively Judaism that was willing to grapple with ancient, traditional, misogynistic texts. And we had the courage and the expertise in those texts to decide how we were going to work with this antagonistic tradition towards women in a way that we could transform intellectually solidly, but nevertheless in a Reform fashion, to meet the needs of our new world, which in this case was to have women leaders. 50% of the population needs to be 50% of our leadership for us to thrive. Those conversations have, in some cases, purely political implications, but they're undergirded by the College Institute's capacity to provide raw material of ideas from texts and the Jewish tradition that link us to Judaism, even the Judaism that sometimes we change as we go. That is really important work that we do at the Hebrew Union College, which parallels the work of creating the leaders like your Rabbi Steinberg, who bring those ideas to life, who implement them in the actual institutions and communities where we live. That's the double work of the Hebrew Union College.
It's beautifully said. In other words, I mean, HUC has a history of being courageous, whether it's saving scholars from Nazi Germany, who became literally the leaders of our movement for 2 generations, or marching in the civil rights movement. Somebody called me the other day, said, I never knew all these rabbis put their jobs on the line, stand up for
They
what
went to jail.
Himself.
They went to jail. That's
absolutely.
Right.
And then, of course, to your point here of the ordination of women, we're celebrating the 50th this next year.
50th year. That's right.
Yeah, wow.
That's right.
Incredible. So this is a complicated question, as simple as it is. What is the ideal rabbinic student? I mean, is there a common denominator that the student shares, even if he wants to be a chaplain, or she wants to be a hospice, or he wants to be a congregational rabbi or a camp rabbi? Is there a common?
Yeah, Rick Steinberg is the.
All right, I'll pay you later.
That's right.
Dr.
That's right. We
Holo.
got it under the table. I wouldn't say that that we can picture or paint a picture of the ideal rabbi, but I will say that there are 3 primary components of the human makeup of what goes into a great rabbi that we're always looking for. And of course, they're always in different proportions, depending on the strengths and the interests of the rabbi in question. But there really are three prime, shall we call them, I don't know, like prime material in the personality of the rabbi. And they are the following. First, there has to be an intellectual component. Now, that doesn't mean that this person has to be a textual scholar all the time, but there has to be an intellectual curiosity that makes this person a lifelong learner and teacher. The Torah has to be at the roots of this person's nourishment so that they come out and they can bring it above ground and share it with the Jewish people appropriately integrated and interpreted for our time and our people. So there's a large intellectual component, and as your Rabbi Steinberg knows, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of language work, and it's not just Hebrew; it's also Aramaic. You have to read lots of texts, the Talmud, the Bible. You have to read rabbinic responsa, letters over the years. There's just a lot there, and it's hard academic work. That's bucket number one. You have to be willing to engage in that, take it seriously, and be a lifelong learner. Number two, you have to be a spiritually attuned person. You have to be a person who empathizes, a person who is seeking spiritual growth and not resting on his or her laurels. You know, we're all growing as adults, and at the age you come to rabbinical school, typically sort of your late 20s, mid late 20s, that spiritual moment is extremely dynamic. You have to be at the same time rooted in the Jew that you know you are, and at the same time willing to blow that up and expand it. You have to strike a powerful balance between rootedness and change, and it's all in the spirit. It's in your practice of Judaism. It's in the way you work it pastorally. It's in the way you think about prayer, to lead prayer, not just for yourself, but for your whole community. It's an extremely dynamic, very, very hard to pin down or characterize quality a person has, but they have to have it, and they have to be willing to let it grow and evolve, and they have to be susceptible to what we have to teach them in this regard. That's number two. And then number three, in order to be a rabbi in the modern world today, we in the Reform movement pride ourselves on the fact that we're not producing rabbis to go off into their study and study all day and maybe visit you in the hospital. There is a practical component to the rabbinate that our rabbis need to know, and we at the Evening College really dedicate a lot of thought and time and curricular time to this as well. We expect our students, and we help them grow in this way, to become savvy organizational thinkers. They may be an entrepreneurial rabbi who doesn't really have an organization, but they still have to be organizationally savvy. They have to understand the ins and outs of budgets and boards and lay leadership and the world around them and politics. They have to be willing to do the sometimes thankless work of picking up the chairs after Shabbos, and carrying out the trash. And they have to know why that matters. And they have to understand why it matters that the maintenance team should see the rabbi doing that. And this kind of work was what I call organizational savvy. Now, you don't have to come into us organizationally savvy because we're here to train you, but you have to come in with a desire to understand that organizations are the expressions of communities. They're not just walls and roofs. They are the expressions of us. And so we have to have leaders who can build them meaningfully, but also effectively.
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, to me, whether you're a lay leader and maybe more importantly, as a professional, that's mitzvah work. Putting those chairs away is mitzvah work for what it models and what it represents. And you also need the space. So
yeah, right. You need to have the roof.
There's a
That's right.
practical
That's right.
aspect to it.
We don't like to daven in the rain. We need a roof. We have to pay a mortgage.
Some of my colleagues poke fun at me because we have a vision statement at Temple called the 4 M's. That we're a Reform congregation based on memory and mitzvah, mensch-making, and making meaning. And everything we do is seen through those lenses. And if we can't fit it in one of those 4 M's, we shouldn't be doing it.
Here.
Try to be very thoughtful about how we approach it. So we mentioned career paths for Reform rabbis, and I think people will be surprised to know that only half of Reform rabbis serve in congregations. Right? I mean, it's maybe it's 55%, but it's not much more than that. I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but uh, so what other areas are people going into in terms
So
of
I,
cabinets?
I'm not 100% sure about the proportions, and I don't know if that includes retired rabbi. I mean, I don't know what the number includes, but I will say this: the Hebrew Union College defines its educational project for the sake of educating rabbis as more than just pulpits. It is true that pulpits are, we are integrated into the Reform movement. We are, as you said, one of the legacy institutions that is the Reform movement. So we're attuned to creating pulpit rabbis, no question, and that does tend to be 50% plus of the expectations of the prospective students who come to us. They picture themselves being pulpit rabbis one way or the other. So that's the biggest piece, no question about that. But there are other ways to be rabbis, as you can all imagine, that are very effective. The two biggest categories are not going to be surprising. The first one is Hillels. Everybody understands the articulation point in the growth of a Jew about the articulation point of college of Hillel. It's where you're exposed to the world beyond the protective cupola of your parents and your synagogue or whatever your Jewish identity is based on, and you're out in the world and you're facing all kinds of ideas, and Hillel is sort of that link. It's a tenuous link because you're also rebelling, and it's a very, very rich and complicated organization and does wonderful work. I'm really honored to be associated with Hillel's, and we prepare rabbis for Hillel's. I would like to say we had more rabbis in Hillel's because I do believe it is an articulation point, and I think it's got just tremendous leverage because of that. However, that's one realm of work. The other big realm that's kind of just hard to categorize is just organizations, non-synagogue, non-Hillel organizations. So you could work for the American Jewish Committee. You could work for the Goldring-Woldenberg Institute of Jewish Southern Life. You could work for any number of organizations, civic, sometimes not religious at all. Some of us go into academia and never really hold a pulpit. I'm not a rabbi. I said some of us. It's a habit because I hang. Some of my best friends are rabbis. So uh, the so that organizational bucket is a big bucket, and it's as wide ranging as the possibility for organizations as you can imagine. Sometimes they start brand new organizations, which can be incredibly gratifying to see what they're doing to change the world.
Constantly reforming
Yeah,
what it looks like.
yeah.
You and I have spent many dinners talking about this. The future of American Judaism. Maybe start with the pulpit. Do you see any trends? Do you see things happening that we should be aware of as you look out to the next decade? And just more in general, what American Judaism might look like?
There's a couple of vectors on which I might answer that, and it depends on the day. It depends what's on
Yes,
your
I
mind.
hear you, brother. I hear you.
uh, the we're now in COVID, and so the most important lesson of COVID is not a COVID lesson. The most important lesson of COVID is that it put a very fine point on something that we have known now for a decade, at least, which is the digitization of experiences that we think of as anti-digital. So when you think you go to services and you have your bagels and lox at Kiddush afterwards and whatever, that can't be replaced by Zoom. That can never go digital. We have begun to question that now for 10 years, at least in my consciousness. Now COVID has brought it all sort of super intensively upon us, that there is a lot. Maybe you can't literally share bagels and lox over Zoom, but you can share a lot. And I don't know what your experience has been, Rick, but some rabbis are experiencing increased numbers of participation because the walls are broken down, and that's a cliche, but the digitization of experiences that we intuitively don't think of as digitalizable, that they won't let
I think he
themselves
just
be.
made up a word, but I like it.
Yeah, with like 6 extra syllables. So the that's forcing us to change. I think that's huge. I think it's an opportunity. I also think it's a challenge.
Yeah,
Um,
it worries me a lot.
yeah, and no,
Our numbers are through the roof and people are loving it. And at the same time, the three-dimensional experience cannot be replaced.
that's right.
I
That's
mean,
right. And some
go ahead, I
aspects of it,
interrupted.
yeah, no, it's very complicated. And here's one of the most important lessons I've learned. You cited the fact that I co-founded HUC's digital learning platform for the population, for the world, just wide. One thing I learned that was really humbling, which is most people think that digitization of experiences is inherently cheaper because the distribution is so easy. You already pay for your internet. It kind of doesn't matter, et cetera. Um, what I've learned is how expensive it is. So I mean, the hardware is constantly updating. So you constantly have to buy new hardware. And since we're nonprofits, we're not getting a tax deduction on the depreciation of the hardware. So it's very expensive. Getting talent who can speak to a camera is not, these are very, very new challenges. So I am also skeptical. I'm not a digital convert. I just want to be critically minded and thoughtful about how the digitization of our experiences as human beings can ultimately be a net positive. How can we make the best of it? But I would never give up on the core. I mean, if anything, one of the things we've learned from COVID is how much we miss each other,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really important. And I'm going to hold on to that, and I think we all should. That's one major vector. The other major vector that has been on the reform movement's mind collectively for some time, and certainly on mine, is the erosion of movemental loyalties. Increasingly, younger Jews coming up don't instinctively identify as reform or conservative or reconstructionists. Maybe they do Orthodox, it depends, but even that's changing. So the idea that the pipeline to the Hebrew Union College and to the leadership of the reform movement is going to come from camp kids always being in the movement is very different now. And I want to pause right there to observe something before I talk about the future. I want to talk about the past a little bit because this is something I really want your congregation to hear. Because there are times when it's really appropriate to pause and to look back and see what you have achieved as a member of the reform world. One of the primary reasons that the movemental boundaries are blurring is because the values undergirding all of liberal Judaism, by which I mean everything outside of the camp of Orthodoxy and even to some degree in Orthodoxy, all of those values are merging. Today, it is very difficult for you to find a conservative, reconstructionist, or reform Jew who isn't thrilled to support gay marriage. For us, it's a no-brainer. It's like we crossed that bridge. It's whatever. Women at the pulpit, for example, that's already a full generation that we already crossed that bridge. I mean, no one even thinks twice about this. Well, here is where I want us all to pause. We're merging as movements because our values are merging, but those values are Reform Jewish values, which you, Rick Steinberg, and your staff and your congregation, you to whom I'm speaking, you made this happen. Because when other Jews were rolling their eyes, when other Jews were saying we were Jewish light, we were out there changing reality. And what we take for granted now, I have a daughter and a son, the very idea that my daughter might not have had a bat mitzvah never even crossed my mind. Nobody thinks that anymore. No, we take it that's not my merit. It's not my wife's merit. It's not my daughter's merit. It's our forebears, not so long ago, by the way, just one generation, who fought and created with the support of synagogues and with Jews in the pews who cared about this, who wanted women leadership to reflect the richness of the fabric of the Jewish population itself. We made that happen together. And there are so many social changes along the way that we deserve to understand the erosion of movemental loyalties as the result of our own successes. that we have changed the face and the baseline expectations of American Judaism, the largest population of Jews in the world. This is really powerful. It is also, as I look forward, it is also a challenge because there is the risk, to speak very plainly, there is the risk of becoming a victim of your own success. This happens in life. We know this. It's possible that in the erosion of the movemental loyalties, because we're all loyal to the same values in the first place anyway, that some of that movement value proposition or even culture is less difficult to ascertain. It's not so obvious. And so there are different ways that we in the Reform movement, in the pulpit, at HUC, in the Union for Reform Judaism, and in other countries, by the way, there are different ways we're going to have to understand what Reform Judaism means to people who are willing to show up, and then to learn how to attract people who don't know that they want to show up yet, but they probably do.
It is the best explanation I've heard. Thank you so much for sharing that. My mind is flooded. First, my last interview was with Rabbi Denise Egger. And
Oh my God. Talk
you
about a change agent.
want to hear about Change Agent, please go back to our YouTube channel and listen to that. She's the first openly gay president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the third legacy organization of the Reform movement. And not single-handedly, but she was a great leader before this was widely accepted and had brought us to where we are today in large measure. And then, Josh, as we speak today, on the 2nd of March, this will come out on the 15th of March. I don't know if you saw that the Israeli Supreme Court today decided that reform and conservative conversions in Israel ought to be counted. And so even Israeli society is legitimizing how reform has made an impact. And, you know, this is for a different lecture, but I have a theory that the Talmudic rabbis were really the first reform rabbis, because the temple was destroyed, and then they came to each other and said, how are we going to be Jewish in this new day and age? How are we going to figure out when to light Shabbat candles if the sun, we're not in Jerusalem and we can't see? You know, it's really interesting way to think about it, and we're carrying that torch, I think, in a lot of ways. One other thing, a little bit, maybe if you don't want to talk about it, it's okay. I can see movements merging in a lot of ways, but I also see a number of rabbinical schools coming to the fore that don't have nearly the training or the depth of the scholarship that HUC has, or the Jewish Theological Seminary, or the American Jewish University has, or Yeshiva University, where I had 5 years full-time training, a year in Jerusalem, and then 4 years stateside. And people can go over a 2-year period on the weekends to become rabbi and hold the same title. I understand why those exist, but it makes me nervous for our future a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on that kind of competition, if you will? I hate to say it that way, I don't really mean it, but those upstarts.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, we romanticize the upstart in so many of ways in our economy today, just secular world wise. You know, we often think of the startup, startup nation, Israel. We tend to romanticize that. Out of collegial respect, I'm going to refrain from commenting on other institutions, and I will simply comment on the Hebrew Union College, which is to say, 5 or 6 years, because we have a sixth year in some programs as well for the rabbinical school. Not to mention the cantorate, by the way, and the ranks of educators and nonprofit managers and leaders. We are a demanding institution, and we take a hit in recruitment and admissions sometimes when we have a long program that forces you to go to Israel and move and pick up your life. It's a demanding program. It uproots your life, and you have to say to yourself, in order to come to HUC, not only do you have to get interviewed and accepted and essays and all that stuff that you would for any academic program, but once you're accepted, you have to really, you're, like I said, you're usually in your mid to late 20s. You're already an independent adult, and you can imagine achieving a lot in those 5 or 6 years that you're going to have to put on hold in order to go to school. It's it asks a lot. I like to think that we give a lot, and that the careers that we open for leadership of the Jewish people are gratifying and rich ways to live one's life. And that means studying a lot of Torah, including a lot of Torah that isn't so obviously relevant. It means crossing town in Southern California, and I know to whom I'm speaking, Southern Californians, every week, multiple days a week, to get to your student pulpit or to get to your internship, because you need that organizational savvy, and there's only one way to get it, which is digging in.
Or driving to Orange County an hour each way.
Exactly. And you need to make yourself fully vulnerable to be a spiritual leader in ways that can be extremely difficult and require courage and self-awareness. This takes time. There's just no shortcut. It takes time. And I will close this one question with this observation as a professor and as the dean of the Skirball campus. It is my colleagues and my greatest satisfaction to watch that arc from newly accepted student over 5 or 6 years into a burgeoning young rabbi or cantor or educator. It's so gratifying because it's such a long road and they go through a lot, and we watch their change. It just takes time, not to mention effort, not to mention communal resources to pay for all this. It's a big deal. It's a big investment. I just think it's worth it.
Beautifully said. You're going to make me cry, as I'm thinking about my own trajectory. 1990, Jerusalem. And of course, that's the year of the Gulf War. So, my congregation knows, because I've talked about it a lot, what that experience meant for my relationship to Israel and whatnot. And I started in Kita Aleph, which is the least experienced in Hebrew level. And then I went to Kita Bet, the next level, after the summer. And so I was always very anxious about my academic prowess, if you will. And then after my third year in Los Angeles, I won the award, the Faculty Award for Academic Achievement. And never was there a prouder moment in my life, because I feel like I had really reached something. So then at ordination, I was married to a fellow rabbinical student at that time. And she was the graduation speaker. And I just wanted to read the Torah because that was what meant that I had made it, Kita Aleph to Torah. So it felt really good. My professors were so proud of me. I come off the bima, my parents said to me, "Why didn't you have an English part?" So, well, let me explain it to you. I would just say this: HUC made me a rabbi, but it also, more importantly, made me a man. And so I'm always grateful for HUC and its place in my life, and hope to have given back a little bit as well. Speaking of times changing, in the old days, when we were in school, you could count on 80% of the Jewish community being liberal and 20% being conservative. And, if you were in Berkeley or San Francisco or Manhattan, then the numbers were skewed even more. No matter where you go in the States today, that number has really changed. Some places it's 60-40, Orange County, it's 50-50. And it's healthy. It's good to have variety of opinions and whatnot. What are we training our students about creating a safe space in the sanctuary, and at the same time speaking their truth about how they feel about issues of the day and bringing their Jewish knowledge to those moments without alienating people, and making them feel that, well, this is not where I want to go. I don't want to be berated for what I believe every week. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that. We call it in shorthand politics from the pulpit, not necessarily literally from the pulpit, but using the authority of the rabbinate in a political context or way. I'm going to preface my remarks by saying that one of the beautiful things about the Hebrew College is that I get to spend every day with an entire faculty of Jewish scholars who are so much smarter than me and so well read and so creative and such pleasure to be around as human beings, that generates a kind of ferment of ideas and opinions. And in this particular um, case, the politics from the pulpit question, that we differ, a lot of us, and there certainly is no policy in this regard in terms of, we teach A or B on this matter from the College Institute, because as you said, the reality of any given congregation or community is very different, and we have, we relish that variety. And indeed, my colleagues and I differ quite a bit on this, and there's multiple opinions, not differ on a single spectrum, but differ all over the place. So I'm going to speak exclusively for myself. And I believe that our task is, first of all, I believe that religion is political. This is a debate in and of itself. I do not believe it is true. I am certain that there are very, very distilled religious expressions out there with certain people, certain individuals, for whom their religiosity is spiritualized and above any human concerns. However, I think that that's an extreme rarity in the Jewish world and an extremely extreme rarity in the Reform world. I think we all, for all intents and purposes, live in a world where religion is has political elements. It has all kinds of elements. For that reason, and I believe, by the way, that Judaism is in fact not a religion. Judaism is a civilization. Judaism is a language, it's a history, a story, a people, a land, a canon, Torah, God. I mean, it's and they're all undisentangleable from one another. That this is our thing, Judaism, and Christianity is a religion. If you're Christian, you have a statement of faith. I believe X and Y about Jesus and God, and that makes me a Christian. And if when I grow older, I decide I don't believe those things anymore, then I'm not a Christian. That's a religion right there, because that's about your credo. We are Jews. We belong to this vibrant, crazy, difficult to put your name on thing. And as such, even more so, I believe that not only is religion, by and large, not divorced from politics, but more than that, I think Judaism, which has all kinds of laws from antiquity, laws about whom to have sex with, laws about what to eat, what you can buy. I mean, these are political issues. We have a civil code as well as a religious code. I believe that Judaism is inextricable from any political or social concern. So that's a philosophical approach. That's me, my understanding of our thing, our civilization, Judaism. Therefore, in the work of creating leaders for this, rambunctious, hard to define people, I embrace the idea of politics from the pulpit. My goal is to create, in this case, let's just talk about rabbis. My goal is to create rabbis who are so empathic, who listen so sincerely to their congregants, and who care about what they say. And at the same time, rabbis who are so artful, who can speak so eloquently and so clearly and with such purpose, that when these rabbis use the authority of their pulpit to convey a political message, that they do so with such empathy and art and clarity of thought, and with the weight of Jewish tradition behind them, and with the humility to know that they do not have a monopoly on the truth, that when they make a claim or an argument with which any given subset of congregants passionately disagrees, that disagreement becomes an opportunity to say thank you. That is what I aim for. I want to be a Jew. I myself want to be a congregant when my rabbi says something with which I diametrically disagree. And then at the end, I shake her hand and I say, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for putting yourself on the line. Thank you for forcing me to rethink my ideas, even if I come out where I was before. It's not about convincing me. It's about sharing with me and making it all matter. I want my rabbis to do that so well that disagreement is merely an expression of our commitment to heaven and to our work together for the world and the Jewish people. That's what I aim for.
Um, it's beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. It's reminds me of the story of Rabbi Leonard Bierman from Leo Baeck
Oh,
Temple. May he rest in
a
peace.
master, a
Where
master.
people during the Vietnam War, he was a pacifist, so people would buy high holiday tickets just to go hear him speak, so that they could then argue with him after he spoke. I mean, that was like the
That's right. That's right.
spirituality for the day. But um, undergirding what you're saying, Dr. Holo, is that there has to be a mutuality of respect too.
Absolutely.
The rabbi to the pew and the pew to the rabbi, and
Absolutely.
that is really, that's relational almost more than anything.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate it. But what I also hear you saying is, for you, that's part of your spirituality, is to be challenged, is to be pushed, even to disagree, but then to say, okay, sermon's over, now it's time for Aleinu, and we all stand as one.
Yes, absolutely. All of the above. And it is part of my spiritual. I mean, that's why I became a professor, because that's the way I am. But I do think that it's a valuable thing for all of us. And
I
the
really,
principle. No, go ahead, please, please.
I just really appreciate that explanation. I mean, I think our country may not be in that space, but that
I
is
know.
certainly a space to return to. Uh,
Yeah, not only mutual trust, with which I completely agree, but it's also mutual responsibility. Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. Every Jew is responsible for one another. I I am beholden to you. I owe you something because you and I have both chosen to go through life as Jews and to honor our heritage. I am indebted to you. And if you disagree with me, I owe you something. I don't owe it to you to agree with you, but I owe it to you because we have shared our destiny to engage in that disagreement for the sake of being productive, not for the sake of being destructive. That is my obligation. It's my debt.
you should be the dean of a rabbinical school.
Yeah, they keep saying that, I
Last subject. I don't want to take more of your time, but I'm really enjoying this. I could do this for a long time. I know you're a passionate Zionist, and I'd like you to reflect for just a moment or two about American Jews' relationship with Israel, and if you want to comment on the Reform movement's success or lack thereof in Israel, I'd welcome that as well.
Those are two very, very big questions.
I know. Sorry.
I'm gonna knock off the second one first because
Okay.
this is another opportunity for us as Reform Jews to celebrate our remarkable achievements. The Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem has, as Rabbi Steinberg referred, a year in Israel for all of our rabbinical and education and cantorial students, and that's part of the program. But we also have a separate program just for Israelis to become rabbis in Israel, which is a completely different social, economic, political backdrop in which to be a liberal Jew. We have recently, excuse me, we have recently ordained our 100th rabbi in Israel, and they're doing amazing work, both on campus and off campus. Yes.
I was at the ordination of the first woman rabbi in Israel, in the Israeli
Uh,
program.
there you go.
I was
So
present.
that's I mean we are slowly, it's I mean this is very slow. We do not have the leverage that we have in the United States, but we are part of a changing consciousness of what it means to be religiously Jewish in Israel, something we should be very proud of. And it's a huge investment, and I say to your congregation, you should be proud because you are making this happen. You're contributing to the Hebrew Union College by virtue of being a member of this remarkable synagogue and to the Union for Reform Judaism, and we are doing things with those resources that really shape Judaism at the navel of our people, which is Israel, but also in the greatest populations around the world, like here in the United States. So that's just really important. And the Hebrew Union College has a lot to do with that. And I'm so proud of that. It's such a beautiful expression of Zionism to me. However, embedded in your question was a really other direction, which has to do with the American Jewish conversation about Israel and Zionism today. And I have a lot to say about that. And I can get a little bit tiresome because I'm so passionate about this. I am I'm a passionate Zionist. I love Israel. I love the Hebrew language, as you heard Rabbi Steinberg say, his relationship with Hebrew. I love my friends and my family. I have cousins in Israel. My colleagues at the Hebrew New College are so amazing. We do such amazing work. I just love being in Israel, as so many of us do. I define my Zionism as my absolute commitment and support for the state of Israel as a Jewish, secure, and democratic state. That is what Israel is to me. And so everything I do is in that frame. But I am an American Jew. I have no expectation to move to Israel, and my contribution to the Jewish destiny is embedded here in Southern California in the United States. So I have some serious, specific concerns about this issue of disagreeing that we talked about before, specifically as relates to Israel, Palestine, and Zionism. Now, here's the thing. I am concerned about anti-Israel politics coming from European countries. I'm concerned about American anti-Semitism from the far right, from the far left. I'm concerned about those things, and they matter. I'm concerned about evangelical support for Israel, which troubles me in many ways. So, and that's controversial in and of itself, I know. But what I want to focus on and what really animates me is the internal Jewish to Jewish conversation about Israel, specifically as regards Israel and Palestine. And I fear that there are two dynamics going on. So, by the way, Rabbi Steinberg, one thing I do whenever I go in this direction is I feel compelled to out my own politics. Um, I feel that that's really the only way to be fair. So I'm going to tell everybody my politics. I am a dovish Zionist. I believe that the national ambitions of the Palestinian people are fundamentally understandable and reasonable. And I believe that Zionism is entirely legit, reasonable human endeavor that has a great argument in its favor. It just so happens that those two things come into conflict insofar as they both claim a single piece of land, at least theoretically. But I believe that both claims are legitimate. So that's where I come from. And I'm just outing myself because I want people to be able to filter, their own opinions by virtue of being an honest broker. That's what I want to be. So here's my concern. My concern is that to the left of me, people who are more outspoken and often articulating first their concern about the Palestinian cause. My concern to those people on my left is that they should look really hard at how they feel about Israel as a Zionist project, not about the Palestinian, the occupation of the West Bank. I mean Israel itself as this realization of a dream that this ancient, continuous, explicit, and historically documented dream of our return to our indigenous land, the raw legitimacy of any human endeavor. That I want people who are naturally inclined to sympathize with the Palestinians. I don't want to discourage them from that sympathy or that empathy at all, because I share it. But I want it to be embedded in a framework whereby they can articulate to themselves and then to others their respect, love, admiration, commitment to, shared destiny with the state and the land and the people of Israel, our fellow Jews. That's really important. I think those to the left of me can help the conversation be productive when they remind themselves to articulate that love and that commitment as they also criticize the policies of the state of Israel because they have certain commitments to their approach to political stability, peace, and human rights, all of which I find entirely reasonable. This is about tone. This is about emphasis. This is about reminding someone or something that you love them, even as or because you're criticizing them. And I want to say that in any democracy, critique must be understood as an expression of love. That's what democracy is. That otherwise, why be democratic if you can't criticize? That's really important. So I situate myself to the left, but there are many to the left of me, and that is the message that I try to convey. I don't think they want Israel to be deprived of its Jewish character. overwhelmingly. There are some who are in favor of a completely democratic one-state solution, but I don't think that they actually represent the even close to a significant minority of the American Jewish population. I think that they're a tiny, tiny minority. I think the majority of us on the left and further to the left of me imagine a two-state solution with a dignified Palestinian state next to a strong, secure Jewish and democratic state of Israel, such as we know her. That's number one. Number two, to the right of me, my message is A, that critique of occupation is indeed supporting Israel. You may not agree with that. You may think that critiquing the occupation undermines Israel. Fair enough. That's a political argument. Let's have that political argument civilly and committedly with an understanding that we may disagree about how we love Israel, how we imagine Israel's success, but that's what we are doing. We're imagining Israel's success. So we have to divest, as in any democracy. We're so proud of the fact that Israel is a democracy, then we have to act like it. And that means that critique is love. In a democracy, that's how you express your democratic commitment. You critique. Totally kosher. That's number one. Number two, to those on the right of me, I ask that we remember that it is not statistically the vast majority of world and Israeli and certainly also American Jews are Zionists in the sense that they want a secure Jewish and democratic state of Israel. And so I ask that we remember that in the internal Jewish conversation, for all intents and purposes, it is not a conversation or a disagreement or even a yelling match about pro and anti-Israel. Those are misnomers. That is not the argument. And we have to get off that high horse because it's destructive, but more importantly, it's inaccurate. It's not what's really happening when people argue against an Israeli policy. So we shouldn't characterize it that way because that characterization becomes toxic. Rather, I say, let us join forces as committed, loving Jewish Zionists to really argue the polarity that's the problem. It's not pro or against occupation. That's not a problem. That's Israeli politics. That's yelling. That's what we do. The real thing that we can join forces on is the polarity of passion versus apathy. If we have apathetic Jews who don't care enough to criticize Israel, we need to be worried. If we have passionate Jews who defend Israel, who criticize Israel, who do both depending on the issue, who are at the conversation, at the Shabbos table, yelling, throwing challah, that's success. That's what success looks like. That's the polarity we need to work on, aiming for passion. That is Zionism. Zionism has always been rowdy. The Jewish people have always been rowdy. That's what we're here for. That's what I want to see our discussion become, because that will be, as we say in Hebrew, a machloket l'shem shamayim, a disagreement for the sake of heaven, a disagreement for the advancement of the destiny of the Jewish people.
100%. And to me, that's exactly why HUC insists that its professionals spend a year in Israel, their first year, so that we can appreciate the essence of everything that you just said. Thank you. Thank you for that provocative Devar Torah. It really is, really hits home in a lot of ways. I can't thank you enough, Josh, for spending time with us. It's just a joy. Every January, we always get to spend some time together. I wish we do more of it, just for fun. And I just want to say to you that it's passionate leadership like yours and thought leadership like yours that is helping really train the next generation of rabbis. We have one in our own congregation. Rabbi Ziv was your student.
Indeed.
So we greatly benefit from that. And for me, the Talmud teaches that if you find a teacher, you make yourself a friend. And you are an amazing teacher and a dear friend. And I am so grateful for your leadership to our movement and your friendship with me. So thank you very much.
Thank you for Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, and I look forward to when we can spend time together soon. And for the honor of speaking to your congregation, it's absolutely a joy.
Absolutely. We're planning our next year's program in April. So I'd love for you to come for the weekend, and we'll do it and have a great time.
Count me in. Count me in.
All right, my friend. Take good care. God bless.
Thank you.